Hello and welcome to our office webinar series and the session today on the perspective of the Chief Executive Officer on diversity, equity, and inclusion. To be clear, the conversation today is for anyone, regardless of your specific title. If you are or aspire to be a C-suite leader or a key stakeholder in a business environment, this session is for you. So before we get started, let's make sure you're familiar with the webinar tool that we're using today. This is an inclusive and interactive webinar, so you can use the chat function at the bottom of the screen to ask questions or provide your inputs or perspectives on the discussion. We will answer as many questions as possible in real time, and later as well if we don't get to all of them today. Lastly, please note this session is being recorded and will be available after the webinar on our events page at ouroffice.io/events. Again, that is ouroffice.io/events. I'm Sonia Sapovan, CEO of Our Office, where we help organizations of all kinds build an inclusive workplace by providing the 3 Ps: the process, the platform, and the professional expertise, all at one affordable annual subscription. I'm joined by Anushka Sarif, one of my colleagues at our office, who will be helping behind the scenes, moderating the questions in real time, and chiming in as needed. Thanks in advance, Anushka. Now, chief executive officers are often faced with many priorities. And with everything that has happened in the last 16 months, I'm thrilled to be here with one of my favorite CEOs to talk about everything that's happened, especially in the context of the future of work, workplace culture, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Sonia. I'm delighted to be here with you today.
Absolutely. So first, please tell us, how are you and your family doing?
Well, thank you very much. We're doing great. It's a beautiful day in Michigan. Partly cloudy, but this is the great time of year to be here, and we're enjoying it. Spring's popping out all over. You're seeing flowers and faces again. So all great. Thank you so much for asking.
Absolutely, it's a beautiful time in Michigan. I love Michigan all the time, but especially during this time. You lead an iconic company that has been equipping military forces in the U.S. and really around the globe for over 100 years. And AM General is really the legendary builder of the Humvee, which is the workhorse of the military, and the inspiration for the popular Hummers that were made. So you have also a new owner as of 2020, KPS Capital Partners. So tell us how these past months have been at AM General. What's new? How are you doing with return to the office? What's going on?
Well, thank you for recognizing the rich history of it. In fact, it's this year that we're celebrating our 50th anniversary organized as AM General, and our heritage goes back really both through the line to Studebaker and the line back to Willys Overland. Our predecessor company was American Motors. That's where you get the AM General out of that. Prior to that, it was Kaiser Jeep, and prior to that, it was Studebaker. So we've been building military automotive systems for over 100 years. But prior to that, we built horse-drawn transport systems for the U.S. and our allies. In fact, Studebaker took their first contract in 1862 for wagons. And that's our passion is about serving our customers, and particularly customers who are very complex jobs. That's how we approach that. So because of that, because we are part of the defense industrial base, and not just the U.S. defense industrial base, but as you pointed out, the Allied industrial base, there are more Humvees in service around the globe with more of our allies than any military vehicle system in the world. As we stand here today, over 250,000 Humvees in the in over 70 countries. And in the last 5 years, we've actually produced more Humvees and sold them to more countries than anyone else in our industry.
Wow.
So we, at the very beginning of this, AM General is part of critical infrastructure. I mean, I know a lot of companies, over the past 12 months have worked to justify themselves as part of critical infrastructure, but we were from the very beginning. And in the last 12 months, since started this, well, I guess more than 12 months now. So since March of 2020, when this really pandemic hit and started to have an impact on the economy, we've not missed one single vehicle delivery.
Wow.
We've not missed one single delivery of a spare part. And we've not missed one single delivery of an engineering task order, a delivered development program. And I just, I take that, that's a compliment to our workforce, both, across the board. We are, we're like many automotive manufacturers. We have both representation of the United Auto Workers in our main manufacturing plant in Indiana and our aftermarket fulfillment center. We're represented by the electrical workers down in Franklin, Ohio, where we build our engines and transmissions. We've had remarkably few incidents of work-related transmission, and also I think as a percent of a population, relatively small incidents of that. Obviously, we've adapted our workplace practices, but we and I think we were fortunate that this wasn't the first time we tried remote work. Right, we're a geographically dispersed business today. We had actually taken a significant we took a very deliberate initiative in 2017 to come up with kind of a robust infrastructure in our facilities that would allow us to move people around within the facilities. We're very much a project-based business. You want teams, you want the flexibility of teams being able to collaborate on a specific project for a period of time and then move on. So we took a deliberate decision to get rid of landlines and Cat5 cables, desktop computers. We went to laptops. We went to headphones. We don't have phones sitting in the workstations anymore. All the telephony is through the computer, and we got lucky, right? I don't mean to say that we anticipated a pandemic. But those investments that we started in 2017 really paid off. But I think most importantly, none of that technical and process investment would have paid off if we didn't have the support of the path forward from our workforce. And I couldn't be more delighted with the response and the support we've gotten across the board.
Well, as always, you were being humble and calling it, getting lucky. I remember when I visited your facilities, the new facilities, and you had really a vision of how that's going to be. I remember when we're walking through and you were telling me about how it's going to be for the new generation, for what technology had to offer. So I know that there was a lot more thought that went into this than today,
Thank you.
But okay, and what you say about, I didn't realize this, that you haven't missed any deliveries and you've just, kept at it all this time, as the events of recent times in the Middle East show, pandemic or no pandemic, right? There is no stopping, unfortunately, conflicts and issues, and supporting, the war fighters and saving lives is always a business that, again, my hat is off to you and your workforce, and to all of the obviously service men and women who so courageously go through, with all the other issues that all of us have had during this time. You've just kept at it, and you've been successful over many years, not just since you got to AM General in 2016, I think it was, but working with successful CEOs in the past in key executive roles. And then CEO yourself, previous to this at HTT Global, building fully integrated Clover solutions and all kinds of things. So you have like really a huge background experience across both seeing successful CEOs at work and then yourself now in several roles as CEO. So what are the key priorities of any CEO and how have they changed in the past 18 months?
Well, look, CEOs have a pretty straightforward job, right? A mentor of mine told me at one point, you really only have 5 things that you have to do, right? Define a strategy, put together a team to, outline a vision, put together a strategy that will achieve that vision, put together a team to execute the strategy, communicate with your stakeholders, including customers and shareholders, and deliver results. I mean, that's it. It's an easy job to be a CEO. Right? You just have to keep in mind those 5 things. But it always fascinated me that right smack in the middle of those 5 things was the team that you put together to deliver on your strategy and your vision, and then deliver results on the other end. There's a great saying, you know it as well as anyone, that culture eats strategy. So if you don't build the team and the culture that surrounds that team, you're really going to have a difficult time doing the other 4 things. And so that's where I spend a lot of my time, because I think that's one of the things that as a CEO I can impact most directly. The vision, I'm going to work with a collaborative environment with our the market kind of leads that. You just do your best to interpret it. The strategy is just looking at facts and figuring out where to go, what you're capable of doing, what you're not capable of doing, what you can do well, what you don't do well today, how to get that better. But my view of my role as a CEO is really to focus on that team and the culture that team functions in. And I think if I can get those things right, the other 4 things fall into place a lot easier. And if you don't get it right, you just aren't going to get the other 4 things done.
Yeah, no, you make a great point. It really leads to the conversation, which is very timely right now, because we're approaching the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's killing on May 25th last year. And there's no doubt that there is new awareness and heightened awareness of social justice in our daily lives. And not just in the US, around the globe. And in the workplace, that's translated into a lot of focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's become a buzzword and a priority for many organizations. What you just shared kind of explains why you were ahead of all of this really almost 3 years ago when you launched a very focused effort on diversity, equity, and inclusion at AM General. And full disclosure for our audience, of course, as part of that, we were very lucky that you were one of our first customers who decided to invest in an integrated our office solution. And we've been really delighted to support you all this time, going on the 3rd year now. But can you share, what's important to you then is important to you now? You've described why, but how do you think it ranks or should rank among CEO priorities today? I mean, you had this vision, it's important, but many CEOs, as we know, the job is, you and I come from a school of thought that the CEO's main role is to create shareholder value, of course, as well as, of course, certainly many other priorities with other stakeholders. But that's a key thing. So, what would you say? When people come from different industries, they come from different. Some may say, listen, the global markets I'm operating in are really, and yes, I hear diversity, equity, and inclusion is important. But we don't discriminate. We comply. We have compliance programs, and right now it's a priority, but it's not like the highest priority, or it's not something that maybe we'll see next year what we can do about it. What do you say? And I'm not like trying to lead the witness here, but could you share how you see that broadly, and what do you hear from your peers?
I think a couple things. I mean, one, look, we're all companies, all CEOs have to kind of you got to hit the compliance bar, right? There's a requirement and regulation out there. That's kind of the minimum thing that you got to do. But if that's all you do, you're not setting up competitive differentiation. And so it's very important, but it's important because I put it in the context of how do we achieve competitive market differentiation for AM General and separate AM General from the rest of our competitors and the rest of a pack in a very crowded field. And that's not only just competitiveness in growing our business, making more sales. That's competitiveness for attracting talent into the business. It's a cycle. Those things are inextricably linked. And when we had the opportunity to talk about your tool, what impressed me the most was, if you don't actually identify and measure a problem, you can't solve the problem. And then it's just talking, right? And we can have a whole bunch of bog sats, right? I got to figure out a different one, right? Because guys meaning all inclusive, but a bunch of guys sitting around talking isn't a way to address an issue. You really need to measure what you're trying to achieve, what your baseline is, and then set objectives for where you want to go. And we had those measurements from a compliance point of view, right? What percentage of this, what percentage of that. But that doesn't make improvement. That just, you're just watching passively and reporting on what's happening. You really need to get at the heart of what it is if you're going to make that movement. And so, and it's, I'm thankful that we did it now because it's manifesting itself right now. I mean, we're entering in probably one of the most competitive labor markets we've seen. 20, 30 years that I've been in this industry, this is one of the most competitive labor markets you got in there. And it's interesting, when you're trying to recruit people into your business, it doesn't take them very long to understand your culture. In fact, it takes new recruits into your company. They probably can identify what's going on in your culture a lot quicker than you can, right? Because they walk in, they see it new. We've gotten used to the stains on the carpet and the smells in the cafeteria. That pops out immediately to someone who comes in new. So if you don't work on that ahead of time, you're just too late. And if you don't get late, you get late early. And that's why, at least from my perspective, I felt that this was important as a way to make the business fundamentally more competitive. For our position and our ability to attract talent, and I'm thankful that we did, particularly going into this environment now.
Yes, and I know that you are actually yourself quite engaged in the process. You look at all the many different ways of looking at the analytics. You engage in the environment to kind of have conversations and then browse and share your stories and so on. And that's really a very unique thing. Must be a unique thing for you to have 24/7 at any time. You're sitting at an airport anywhere and just be able to just talk to anybody. Do you have any personal anecdote or something that you'd like to share? I mean, it's up to you. I don't mean to just bring it on you, but I know that you've been quite active and you have, there's some interesting things you've waited on, and sometimes you've shared personal, just your experiences.
Yeah, it's as I said, we're a global company. We support not only the U.S. Armed Forces but our allies around the world. Diversity isn't and inclusion isn't just a U.S. thing, right? It's a global thing, and there are a lot of challenges in understanding, different cultures and being effective in different cultures. I was in Ankara, Turkey on 9/11. I was running a manufacturing business, and I walked the manufacturing line every single day. And I walked the line on September 12th, and everyone on that line stopped and offered their condolences. And but it occurred to me that would, if that had been the first time I walked down there, I don't know that would have been the reaction, right? So you got to make a personal commitment to this, right? You got to make a personal commitment to sharing yourself, and so that others will share with each other, right? And like any other role for a CEO, you got to lead by example, and that's why I think it's important to engage with people, be engaged in our platform, and continue to show what that means to be part of that culture and live that culture. So that's just kind of one of those foundational things to me. It was a point in my career where I'd actually worked more years outside of the United States than in the United States, and so that's but that's my personal reflection. That doesn't mean what I'm very mindful that what my personal views are my personal views. I don't transmit those onto the company, right? It's almost the antithesis of diversity and inclusion. If I were to do that, I'm certainly willing to share them, but I don't think that my personal views ought to be the ones that lead the company. But I think it's more important that those views get shared to develop an understanding than dictated by me. So.
Well, it's in this day and age, people can get on. They can get on Glassdoor, or they can get on, a lot of on Twitter, anywhere, and people can share, how they feel about themselves, what's going on in the world, but also their workplace. And of course, with the environment that you have, and where you share and others share, sometimes the hesitation is. Well, what will people say, if we let all the employees just share, on this platform and just, openly 24/7, how do we handle that, right? It's, and it's a valid point, right? Because that just hasn't been the culture, especially, there have been opportunities and certainly tools and things for people to share about work, talk about projects and, project management tools and so on. But something that's just purpose-built and just intended for sharing about, your workplace culture, some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion topics, that's just new, and anything new, we're human, as human beings, anything new, even if it's a good thing, it's bound to worry us at the beginning, right? So I have a lot of sympathy for that. But I know that you've been one of our most active CEOs personally in putting yourself out there and engaging. Has there been any big surprises, positive or negative, or something that you've learned from, any lessons learned for others?
No, absolutely no big surprises, right? As you might imagine, in a company this diverse with this many employees, there's a different sense of the pace that you're moving on, which frankly is no different than when we talk about our quality management system, right? Some think it ought to be going quicker. Some think it ought to be, slowing down because we're running out over our skis. But again, what I think is the most important is the openness and the dialogue about that, so people can understand everybody's viewpoint. And there's a natural progression to a solution. If you can understand those things, then you recognize what's going on, then you can come up with a path forward to do that. And we're, the culture we're trying to build is one very much of individual accountability for the work that our employees perform. And you can't ask for accountability if you don't ask for input and dialogue and how to get things done. And I think that that dialogue is important, and it's important to have the dialogue in a systematic way, right? So you don't have, you and I have put in quality management systems in manufacturing process and you end up with a hidden factory, right? Because you measure something and then something leaks out on the other side. You're not paying attention to what's going on, right? Because like, okay, well, I got that contained, but it blew out on the other side. And so with that dialogue in social media, the last thing you want to do is force all of that out of the company, right? Because it's going to occur anyway. So I think it's just much more healthy if we provide the opportunity for the exchange, the interaction among the employees, because then they'll, then the culture is going to get right over time.
Yeah,
and it'll be clear to everybody that's foundational to the culture.
Yeah, and I know one of your recruiters had actually shared with us from your HR department at one time, if you don't mind me sharing that, it's a good thing, right? That there are some stories and things that come out in this when people share, when they've given that opportunity to share, that she actually uses as advertising for branding positively in her recruiting.
Right.
And that there is such openness, there is such an environment, especially for millennials who are used to doing these kind of things all the time anyway. I think my story of why I got into this. I'm an engineer by training, but I was an executive, at GM, running a P&L, and we really got into diversity, equity, and inclusion as a strategy for innovation, for building a more innovative brand at the last big, great company that I worked in, and then we kind of worked at it for quite some time. About 6.5 years, and we made good progress, but not really nearly enough compared to where we had set our sights. The diversity, the numbers were easier to get, starting with recruiting. So we started like everybody else who looked, and I looked like 5 levels down from me, and it was stacked with everybody looking the same. With all due respect, white males, nothing wrong with that, but when that's all, right? And all the way down. And so we set our minds to bring more diversity, and certainly for the recruiting aspect of it, it's got to be done right, of course. There's great experts to help with that. But if you set your mind to do it, it's a more kind of a clear path to doing that. You can get some help, to go to the sources, some of the places where you can hire. They're more diverse. There's now even job boards and different ways of going to HBCUs and so on. But then once we did that, we came to the point of, okay, now we're more diverse. We see more diversity, racial, gender, and so on, and disabilities, sexual orientation, actually. And then we realized that, but we got to keep them, and we got to keep them happy and productive. So it's not enough to just have like a sampling of 1 or 2 here and there, And so there came the conversation around inclusion and how do you. I'm just wondering, how do you define inclusion? How do you know you have an inclusive? Diversity is, you can look around, and I'll often tell other CEOs and my colleagues that diversity is a fact. It's going to happen. Just the profile of the workforce is becoming more and more diverse as we go. Even today, with over 50% of the workforce being millennials and Gen Zers, and their majority being, diverse backgrounds. It's just a fact even now, but it's becoming more and more so. By 2025, 75% of the workforce will be millennials and Gen Zers. So certainly the trend is in that direction. But creating an inclusive workplace and where people feel like they belong, that's quite another matter. So how do you define that even? And how do you know, what's your ROI for determining that you're getting at least
inclusion?
More inclusive? Yeah.
Well, look, again, it's like it's part of our system to measure, when we're getting engagement with employees, and we do that through a survey. We ask them how much they feel that they're getting engaged, so it's from their perspective. We measure the engagements that employees have on a range of things, right? So we're trying to measure not only what their perspective is, but what we're actually seeing is, there's a perception of it, and then there's kind of the hard data, and we put in systems in place that force isn't really it, but as I said before, the accountability is there. Everyone has to comment on some things. So we had a meeting just this morning. We do it every month. It's an hour. We look at efficiency and effectiveness initiatives, innovation, and we systematically go through every department, every employee, every direct report chain, and we actually have a chart where we measure the engagement. Right? Has an employee briefed a project, talked about an initiative, achieved results on the initiative, and we look at that engagement diagram once a month, every month.
Yeah.
But that is just an example of a number of things, and it's just part of our AM General Business Operating System to measure engagement in a number of different ways. So the data is shown that we're being impactful on this. And then, as I said before, 14 months under a pandemic period, not missing a vehicle delivery, not missing a spare parts delivery, and not missing an engineering deliverable billable hour. I got to believe those look like results to me. And that's what it's about, right? And measurements of our customer satisfaction. Are we getting stuff to them on the right time? So measuring the engagement directly, and the inclusiveness and the engagement directly, and then measuring it on the back end of what really matters for the entire business, and making sure that, because then you can go to employees and you say, okay, see where our engagement has increased, and see what our business results were. Right? There is a direct correlation between those two things. So that's our approach. There are a lot of them out there. But again, I'm a firm believer that if you just talk about something, but you don't measure the something that you're talking about, if you don't measure diversity, if you don't measure inclusion, you're not going to be able to take the steps to improve those. If you don't improve those, somebody else is, and you're going to be behind your competitors in the market.
Yeah, no, I know that, you take a very holistic view of things. So from what you're describing, I'll kind of maybe put it a little bit differently too, just for different kind of people in the audience. It's not just the one initiative or one kind of a one-dimensional approach to how can we be a more positive, inclusive workplace. It really permeates throughout everything you do. You look at it with that lens as you look at everything that you do across your projects. And what I want to actually also mention is, as part of this kind of systematic, as you said earlier, systematic approach, and having data and having a standard way of going about it, you also have a signed DEI plan, which you have signed personally, which is awesome. I mean, that puts you in like the, I see, and I know you've signed on things like, the diversity and equity and inclusion action, that CEOs, a group of great CEOs have signed off on. But I think even in this group that have made pledges and signed off on, some great statements, when there have been recent reports, on when they ask the CEOs, so what action are you really taking, right? Beyond the pledges, beyond the statements, that a lot of them haven't yet taken any solid actions or different actions beyond what they were just doing as a matter of course, maybe some training, maybe some networking events and so on. So for someone who's just trying to take that next step, right? What would you, as a CEO, as a C-suite executive leading a big, a part of the organization, what do you think? How should they get started? A lot of times I think the difficulty is when we talk to people, people are like, everybody, be honest with you, I think a majority of people realize that it is a matter of just the fact that things are getting more diverse. People's expectations are changing. Even investors and shareholders, customers' expectations are changing. And so, something needs to be done. But a lot of times they just don't know where to start, and they do worry, and I think it is a healthy worry, to not do something that might backfire, or not do something that doesn't feel authentic to the work workforce, because we have seen that happen. So how should they go about it? What do you suggest how they get started about it?
Very much the way we got started. When I introduced this to the company, I was very clear that my objective on this wasn't, diversity and inclusion for diversity and inclusion's sake. As noble as it is, absolutely a noble reason to do it. But the reason to do it, my responsibility as a CEO, is make yourself more competitive. I viewed it as a competitive advantage, that if we could figure out a way to get it done right sooner than anybody else, we were going to have a competitive advantage on that. And the vignette you had on the recruiting is exactly what we were looking for. Mm-hmm. So if you ask me how to get started, I would offer that you decide on where you want to be, right? First step in taking a journey is understanding where you want to go. I mean, otherwise you're just wandering around. So set an objective of where you want to be. For us, we wanted to be clearly differentiated leader in this approach in our industry, because this industry pretty well. It's not one that is generally viewed as the most diverse and inclusive industry. I felt there was an opportunity to give ourselves a real true competitive advantage. And it was necessary because of the defense and aerospace businesses in the United States. We're much more, I would argue, we're much more global than anyone else. Over 60% of our sales were to customers outside of the United States. So if we didn't get this right, we weren't gonna be a strong global competitor. We had to be a strong global competitor. So that was that. And I was very fortunate to get buy-in, from the rest of our leadership and obviously the rest of the employees that, that matters, right? And it matters because it makes the company better, it makes the company more competitive across a range of things. And then get an understanding of where you want to go, get the buy-in from the people around you, and in your case, get a process and tool that you can use so you can measure the progress. And that's been, not to just turn this into a plug for your tool, but you got to do something, right? If you don't want to use our office, great, but use something that you can measure the progress of getting from where you are to where you want to be. And you don't need to get there all in one leap, right? Yeah. Just lay out your path and get there. I would suggest, if anybody kind of wants a more macro understanding of the progression in this, Sonia, you and I are both of the generation where the quality management systems were immature in the 60s and 70s, and very much we're at a stage then in a lot of ways like diversity and inclusion are now, right? Mm-hmm. And then in the 70s there were a lot of talk about it. People read some books, looked at what our international competitors were doing, and over time have developed those into very definable processes, IETF 16949, ISO standards, and there's a professional cadre of people who understand what that system's about. There are software tools that measure where you are. There's processes, and I've seen and you've seen there are a lot of companies have all that stuff in place, but they just don't have the underlying quality culture. And so I think that from a broad industry point of view, that's very much the stage we're at on diversity and inclusion. So if you want a kind of a historical context of seeing a phenomenon and how it was successfully implemented over time, that's a good benchmark. Take some lessons from that. But if you want to get started, most important thing to know is where you want to go.
Yeah, no, that's a great recommendation. I remember the launch meeting. I think it was late January of 2019, and there was a snowstorm coming in South Bend, Indiana, when we got started with you. And And I remember your words. You know, with all of your VPs there when you were launching, you said exactly what you just said now. That it's a matter of competitiveness. And I remember that when we started, you know, you didn't set any edicts except for this grand vision. But it was not like, here's a quota, you know, or because a lot of times people worry about that too. Or we don't want to, you know, set quotas. When you talk about metrics analytics, people get scared about that. But, you know, or having a plan out there that, you know, they need to then perform to. So you got to do it at the right level. And I really believe that you did it at the right level where you set this grand vision and there's, you know, a plan for what specific things we're going to focus on every 12 months. What are the key objectives we want to achieve? And then without really setting, I remember within 2 or 3 months, it was when you were doing your performance period, like everybody does, you know, beginning of the year. And just by seeing the data and what some of that, and just having these conversations, things just like you said, as you start looking at something, you start measuring it, it kind of gets good on its own almost, you know, it's, I mean, it really. It
very much can, right? I mean, it's look, you know, the bright shining light of day is yeah. You know, is healthy, yeah. And the more you can see things, you know, you put bright lights in a manufacturing plant, you're going to see a lot of stuff that needs to get cleaned up, right? When we put those bright LEDs in there, and there's a lot of stuff that need to get cleaned up, and it was apparent to everybody that it needed to get cleaned up. And I think this has the, you know, this is the kind of thing you don't just let it, you know, obviously you can't just let it be on its own, but. And that's what you'd ask, kind of my priorities and how I view my role. My role is to set the conditions for that improvement to occur. Yes. You know, very much like changing out the new lights in the plant, right? So people can see how dirty it was and what needs to get cleaned up. I view putting together this infrastructure and a system to measure what we want to do, putting together a system for the dialogue and the inclusion that then leads to the improvement that can naturally occur.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. We hear this from, you know, across the board, from CEOs, C-suite executives, you know, leaders, that, you know, just having a, you know, a tool, having a process, having something people could go to. Because when you ask people to be diverse and inclusive, you give them some training and they know that it's good to be diverse and inclusive and they're trying to be, right?
Then, you have them watch another video.
Right, they watch the video. And then the next thing is that, you know, they have a meeting, right? They got to go to a meeting. They want to just, I mean, routinely, I used to find when I had, I think at the time I had like 85 departments. And one day I got together with all the department managers globally. And I was like, you know, we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion and what kind of things everybody's doing. And, you know, it was clear that every time before our quarterly meeting, the last week before that, everybody was like, you know, trying to hurry up and say something good that they did. But you know, as the BCG report says, many people, especially now, you know, want to do something around it, but only 25% of the people that are supposed to be the beneficiaries, you know,
right.
that they derive any benefit. And of course, it's not for lack of trying. It's like you say, you can't just make an edict or make an announcement that we're going to be diverse and inclusive, and then.
Well, you can.
And go.
You absolutely can. You shouldn't expect a lot out of doing it that way.
And
you can, and I've seen folks who try, and
yes.
But if you just say it and then you don't measure what it is, even if you're just going to dictate and you don't measure it, then you're fooling yourself.
And I think your analogy with quality is really spot on, because I remember, you're right. As a young engineer, when on the manufacturing floor, where you know, there would be a warranty call or some defect would be found downstream, and people would come up and say, "Well, who was working this?" You know, it was just like you know, everybody pointing fingers a little bit or hiding in the corner. But over time, you know, it became its own discipline, and quality management systems were developed, and then it was part of manufacturing. It became its own discipline. I very much think that. You know, DEI in some organizations appropriately is part of HR, and sometimes it starts and you know, as the organization evolves, it becomes its own discipline really, and its own with its own leadership and focus. But there's really no substitute, as I've shared with you, for this the CEO effect. And by CEO again, we mean, you know, CEOs, but also C-suite and other key leaders, where It's where you put your attention. It's where people see you put your time. When they see you engage, and then the rest of the organization kind of gets the message. Because a culture can only be created, an inclusive culture, just like culture of quality or culture of safety, can only be created if a lot of people are behaving in those ways, in inclusive ways.
Right. Yeah, I'll never get you're not going to get safety on the floor if I blatantly ignore wearing steel-toed shoes, ear protection, eye protection, where it's required for everybody else. Right? You can erode a culture really, really quick if you don't pay attention to that. I think that's, and so I view very much my role is reinforcing those things and defining, setting the right kind of conditions for the culture you want, and then living by that as well. So.
Absolutely. I want to remind our audience that they can ask some questions. We have a few minutes left. So while I do a little bit of a kind of a reminder of some of the other things that we also have going on, and give Andy a second to just, freshen his maybe his throat. But I want to remind everybody that you can, in fact, ask some questions. So let me just share what, this is a great conversation, of course. We are delighted to have these conversations, and especially here with Andy. But we do also have some opportunities, for just thought leadership in general, because this area needs a lot of thought leadership. There is, a lot of evolution. There's every day. There's, a lot of people are focused on this. So we do have some, in addition to the webinar series, we participate in a lot of other activities. You recognize some of these pledges and things, and also organizations that are involved in really pushing the envelope of what works, what doesn't work, how to get best results. We have a community it's a Future of Work community with roundtable series. We regularly put out blog pieces. Sometimes we quote great people like Andy when they say, when they share their insights, just to share it more broadly. And then also we have guides and things that we share as well. So please take a look and engage as you wish. We also have some upcoming webinars that you can always see again on the website at ouroffice.io/events. We have one upcoming next month with Patricia Nuray on how to create an effective DEI branding strategy. She's an expert in that and helps people do that. In July, we typically take a summer break, but by popular demand, we might actually schedule one. We'll let you know. But in August, certainly, we have Ed Hassan, who is Dr. Hassan, who is a PhD in this topic. He is also a partner company to our office, and he's the founder and managing partner of Kaizen Human Capital. So he will be talking about this topic of, how sometimes you can focus on this topic and get diversity, but not inclusion. So he'll have a good conversation around that. But I want to go into a little bit of a question and answer and see if we have any other questions coming up, or anything else you'd like to share that I haven't asked or brought up yet, Andy, that you would like to just have any parting words of what the audience should know as they go forward.
Sure. No, I give it a couple of minutes for questions, and then we can wrap it up. Yeah.
I think one question that has come up actually is, and I saw it earlier, is, what do you see any difference in terms of size of companies, or, you have suppliers, certainly, you have large customers, as it relates to this lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion? Is there a size limit? Like some companies go, we're too small, or,
Yeah, I don't think you're ever too small for inclusion. Right? Family business is by definition a family. Is going to be as diverse as the family is, but it does mean it should be inclusive. And for all the talk of Fortune 500 companies, right, publicly traded stocks, all of that together accounts for less than 20% of the capitalized business wealth in the United States.
Wow.
The other 80% is family-owned and closely held businesses.
Yes.
So if you don't get diversity and inclusion right in 80% of the economy, we're not really moving forward. Obviously companies that are publicly traded get a little bit more of the headlines. There is no CNBC for family-owned and closely held businesses because they're not watching the ticker tape every day or the stock sticker. But it's I think it's an incredible thing to be done in every business, right? They all have to have accounting procedures. They all ought to, no matter the size, they probably should all have diversity and inclusion procedures and objectives that they can measure.
Yeah, I've heard some customers sometimes have said, where we're too small, we don't know how to get started. It's going to cost money. We just can't afford it. Things of that nature. And then my response, sometimes I say, well, you can't afford not to, right? Because, and especially if you're, smaller, but, have some growth plans, right? For sure. This is something, it's like a tree. I always say it's like a tree that, it's just, if you don't trim it at the beginning and you don't do the right things, you don't prune it, you don't tend to it, it's going to be a problem. Later on, it's going to be a whole lot. At some point, it becomes impossible to go fixing it. We have a question here. Also, it says, what has been your biggest challenge, in this journey of diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, I think getting over the hump, people understand you're serious about it, right? It's one of those things that, it very much has a risk of like, oh, okay, here we got one more initiative. Now we're going to do the diversity and inclusion thing. And that's a risk. And that, you asked me why I was so personally engaged, right? Because you had to get over that hump. And you had to put time and effort and sweat equity into the, making sure that people understood that this wasn't just another headline grabber or something to post or a video to watch. That's been the biggest challenge, is to turn it into something real. We're not done, but I think we've made very good progress. And some of those things are tangibly measurable, and some of those things are less tangible, but certainly indicative evidence that you're heading in the right direction. And it translates into overall business results. If you have a problem with supplier quality, it's going to manifest itself in business results. If you have a problem in diversity and inclusion and you're not getting it done the way you want, it's going to manifest itself in ultimate business results that you measure at the top line and the bottom line. So I think that's where it starts. That's the reason to do it. Like a lot, it's certainly not our only initiative. It's a very important initiative. I think it's central to the initiative because I think it touches culture more than anything else. And cultural change is the hardest change. So you got to put time and effort to make sure people understand that that is really what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I remember when we were launching again back in that January day. There was healthy kind of questioning of, you're talking about competitive, how does it really link with competitive advantage, right? I mean, over time, have you seen that, people have just are getting better appreciation for it, in terms of your key leaders, your employees, your other key stakeholders?
Yeah, I certainly do. We've there's a natural progression of more and more engagement, and the more and more, of our key, and I don't mean just executives, but key talent in the organization that has an opportunity to progress forward, have figured out that, hey, if I get this right in my little group, I can outperform all the other groups, right? And they're seeing the utility of the initiative. And when other people see the utility of the initiative, then it takes off on its own, and that's we're seeing that.
Yeah, I often think that that is. You said a CEO's job is easy, as always, being quite humble about that. It is a hard job because often the CEO is kind of out front, looking ahead, and kind of skating to where it's going, not the puck is going, not where it's at today. And so sometimes it may be hard. I think that's what the courage, what they talk about, the courage of the CEOs, it really comes to play, is to lead the organization in a direction that they think things are going. So in that sense, I'm going to end with one question I see here upcoming that says, so what are your plans moving forward on DEI? I mean, what is the next frontier on workplace culture and with your team?
Well, we're going to grow in scale and grow geographically. We've got great heritage in South Bend, got a great heritage in Detroit. And there are opportunities for us to grow the business beyond kind of those geographic nexus areas, not just in the U.S., but around the globe. We want to make sure that as we do that, as we expand customer engagement around the globe, as we expand operations around the globe, that we're carrying this with us across the globe. And then it has an opportunity to be even more of a competitive differentiator if you can get it done on a global scale, rather than on a relatively regional scale.
Absolutely. Well, Annie, I can't thank you enough. It's been delightful, as always, just talking with you and just sharing your insights so openly and so well spoken. I think that it's given a lot to everybody to think about. All the best in everything you're doing. I know that there's all these new and exciting plans that you always have, and you've been achieving them, and I'm delighted to learn more about them today. So thanks again, and hope to see you soon in Detroit.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for joining. I hope this has been helpful. And Sonia, I want to thank you for what you do. I think you're a real pioneer in this in this field. You've shown not only problem needs to be addressed, but provided a pathway on how to get it addressed. We're certainly taking advantage of the work that you've done, and I want to thank you for your vision and your leadership in the area as well.
You're very kind, but as you know, it's a team effort. We have an incredible team from my co-founder in the technology area to the whole team. Just the various functions that support our customers. We take joy in seeing customers be able to have an effective approach to this and really get their money's worth, for the efforts that they make. It's really just the biggest delight is to get up every day and be doing this. I can't believe that I get to do this actually. And then to hear you say it, it has a special place in my heart. So thank you so much for saying that. But thanks again. Thanks to the audience. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon again. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye now.